All right, good evening. Welcome to Esoteric Lighthouse. We are a group of free and accepted Masons from regular and recognized Masonic Grand Lodges focused on the esoteric, occult, and philosophical lessons found in Freemasonry. This being a public forum, our views and interpretations are not legal or official statements or opinions of any Grand Lodges or Masonic bodies we hold membership with. All opinions, thoughts, and interpretations are solely of the individual panelists. All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Esoteric Lighthouse. This is going to be
good evening, everybody. Welcome. So I guess we wanted to get started with a couple of things. Today we're celebrating the 1 year, or should I say 2020, year in review. And let's go ahead and get started. I think we had a couple of topics, our top 5 shows. And it was pretty good that we had a lot of views on the Temple of Man, part 1 and 2. That was our highest viewership from last year. And I know I had a couple of questions. And what we want to do is just kind of like hit on the episode real quick, kind of like a brief overview, and then answer some of the questions as they're applicable to what we kind of talked about throughout the entire year. And that was one of the biggest episodes that we had. Does anybody have any comments before we get started? Anybody, anything to highlight they want to share from last year?
Not at the moment, bro.
Chris, what did you say? I didn't hear you. Is your mic?
I was just saying, not at the moment, bro.
Does anybody have any? Okay. All right.
Excuse me, Brother Coney. I think Brother Leonard said chat is disabled for live stream on YouTube.
Okay. So one of the first questions that we had was when we talk about the Temple of Man, who is Adam and what significance does he play in our spiritual lives, if any? Anybody want to tackle that?
You want to take that one, Mike, or should I hop in there? You're still muted, Mike.
So one of the first questions that we had was, like, you on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was looking at the YouTube channel and it started echoing, so I had to close one of them out. So when you start talking about the Temple of Man and its relationship to us on our daily life, the Temple of Man basically is what you're doing. You're building yourself as a temple, the Temple of Jerusalem. I mean, the basic premise of the 3 degrees is to culminate in that culminating event of being that Temple of Man. There's so many different elements that go along into that, which, from the chalk, charcoal, and clay. Those are the building blocks or the fundamental principles of drawing a line or designing something. It gives you that structure, or it gives you that basic structure of architecture and graphical depictions of anything. So basically, the design of man was outlined somewhere on a piece of paper, some type of schematic, or drawn on the mind mentally. Afterwards, after he was designed, he next moved in the next stage of how are we going to make this man work? What are we going to put in to make this person understand the world around them? We're going to give them the 7 liberal arts and sciences, and we're going to give them animals, and we're going to give them all these things, the naming convention that are found in Genesis. Then third, what we're going to do is we're going to teach him heartache, and we're going to teach him death. We're going to teach him different things that are going to be similar to where the story of Job is. You know, you're focusing on some type of hardship to find that spiritual you, to make you reach to a higher state. 3 degrees and the temple of man all represent that. It's all about raising your consciousness to a level of awareness that you are a part of something that's bigger than you. And at the same time, you have a purpose and you have to fulfill that purpose. Hopefully I hit it correctly or enough to what you were asking, because like I said, I was messing around on YouTube and I kind of.
No, that's good. That's good. That's a great explanation.
We are, how should we put it? Putting our foot in that pond of, some different things that we're doing here technologically. Yeah. So just to build on that, Brother Mike, we find that, evident in a lot of initiatory systems around the world, you know what I mean? To have folks become familiar with what they would call the Great Spirit, here for the natives here on this piece of land, and just understanding that we are all connected, in nature as far as that physical plane. And if we look at Genesis, you have those 2 creations. You have the body created out of clay, and then you had, the spirit man, Adam Kadmon. But I'm gonna leave it there, bro.
Yeah. And that's where it starts. That's that first blueprint. Adam Kadmon was the blueprint, and Adam Kadmon represents the mental creation or that mental trestle board that I was just speaking of. Adam Kadmon is the blueprint, whereas Adam Rishon is the actual, which is the actual manifestation or something made from the earth, which is technically a golem per se, and not the real man. The real man is that one that was made in the without hands in the eternal heavens.
Well, yeah, you guys mentioned a couple of things. You said about Adam, Kadmon, and Chalk and Clay. I remember when we were talking about atoms to atom, coming from the molecular makeup of man with the carbon. Carbon is a derivative of the word charcoal, and it's in that molecule makeup. That's a part of our that carbon or charcoal makes up man. He is the building blocks of man. So I don't know if they knew that back then, but we can always say that there was some speculation that man's molecular makeup not only speaks to who he is, but also speaks to what he is. And he is an atom in the earth. He's supposed to take charge and have dominion and power over the land, not just in his mind and his heart, but in his feet as well. So it's that what's the whole purpose of what we're doing here is to come back to that realization of who we really are. So that's good. That's good. That's good. I guess for me, what would be the connection between Noah's son and Abraham from that perspective when we talk about Adam?
Well, from Noah to Abraham, going out when you want to go from the biblical lineage from Adam to Noah, Adam represents a phase or where we get the term race from, the real race, the root race, not these races as we are looking at as ethnicities today, but race as races, a species of humans. So Adam to Noah was one specific race. Then Noah represented an evolved human. His sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they represented another set of humans or another set of thinking, and more along with the, let me backtrack. So Noah was more along like a DNA, like Adam. If you look at Adam, Adam is the body. Noah then translates into the DNA. Then Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they transform into our 3 brains, our instinctual brain, our intellectual brain, and our emotional brains, those 3 centers. Then where Shem comes into play, Shem is actually somebody else, a key figure that goes by the name of Melchizedek. A lot of people don't know that. Shem is actually Melchizedek. Melchizedek is the one who meets Abraham on the sides of the road, and Abraham gives him a tenth of his spoils of war after Sodom and Gomorrah. So when you start looking at it, you start looking at it as the evolution of the mind, or the evolution of man being a thought into a thinking brain, an emotional brain, and a brain that has a gut feeling. That's the evolution that the biblical Adam goes from to where we end up at when you start going into Abraham. Then Abraham, he breaks it off further into some even more in-depth allegory. These allegories that Abraham brings along, it brings in, well, you had fear already, but it brought in a new type of fear. It was fear of having to do something that you didn't want to do to someone you love to prove your glory or your faith. That this is when you're starting to understand that, hey, if I want to go a certain way, there's going to be challenges and roadblocks that may test me and my building of my temple and my character. How do I want to go and build this temple and character? Will I kill my son to go that far? Or will I use common sense and stay my own hand? Then that's when you start seeing morals start to become more prevalent in the building of the temple of man. Then flash forward, now we're here and we're building Solomon's temple after Noah and Moses. Moses, you start seeing laws. With Moses and the laws, now you're getting ethics, values, principles, things like that. Then once you get to Solomon's temple, he combines all that and says, okay, this is what a man should be. This is what the temple of man should be. I've culminated history from the beginning to now. And now we're one complete unit at me, and I'm building this temple for the creator, which is technically me. I'm the one who created it. So I'm the creator and the createe. I'm creating myself.
You hit on a couple of things when you were first talking. You mentioned that fear, but a healthy fear, a fear of letting go and gaining something new. The first thing that popped into my mind was when we were asked to divest ourselves from metallic substances. Always look at it as giving up the things of this world which we are attached to. I think it was something in Buddhism that says that pain comes from attachment. So we would not suffer if we weren't attached to everything, that because when we lose it or it doesn't go the way we think it should go, that's where that pain comes from. So we most of the pain that we get, we inflict upon ourselves because we strive and we pressure ourselves to have and to do certain things, and when it doesn't happen, then we're sad. So it kind of feels like it goes back to that letting go of that. Fear not, but this is something new that you're about to embark upon, to be at a level of Solomon's temple, coming into the lodge in a different perspective, to gain a different knowledge. Let go of those things that do not give you any growth. It's not going to build you up per se. Well, that's good.
As Buddha would say, practicing detachment.
Right. That's good.
Good stuff. I see y'all going in as usual. You know what I mean? One of my favorite topics, the temple of man. And it all goes back to as above, so below. You know what I mean? They don't want to confuse people too much who haven't done their own personal research on the two different atoms. You had one atom that was above and one atom that was below. So these things are, what's in the heavens is here on earth. And at the end of the day, we're trying to raise up our level of awareness and our level of consciousness. That's what these different schools of thought are really about. I know some folks might get a little spooky when they say, oh, they didn't stole my Abraham or my Noah, and they didn't twisted the story around. No, it's just another way of looking at these symbolic characters. It's just another storyline, another school of thought. It's just another way of looking at things. Most of us on here were probably raised up just from a purely biblical perspective. I would want to wrestle and say we probably all come from Christian households. And so we were taught from certain schools of thought to see these characters in a certain way. And what we're presenting here is just a new way of looking at these characters. But if you strip off all of these storylines, all these symbols and characters and so forth, you're going to get the same type of moral and intellectual truth staring at you. So I just want to throw that in there. I didn't want to digress or anything, but I know there's probably a couple of, or maybe some new viewers out there that haven't done their personal research, not trying to spook you out. These are just different ways of looking at some of the same moral and intellectual truths.
Yeah, when you say the three brains, I always go back to one of our panelists, Dr. Charles Watson. He says causation does not always mean correlation.
Correct.
We talked about the three brains. So how did that come to play that it really means the heart, the stomach, and the mind? Like, what does that mean in the essence, and why did that correlate that way?
Well, one of the reasons it correlates that way is basically how we react to certain situations. Psychology and psychiatrists, these doctors, and even people in the educational arena who've been studying man, we always have three different ways we react to things. They always say, hey, I'm thinking this, I'm feeling this, or it's just in my gut. I know this. So that's where they came about. And they've been saying it for hundreds of years, but we termed it differently, just depending on the school of thoughts that people went through. But science has proven that you have more neurons in your intestines than you do in your cranium, in your brain. You have those same neural networks going through your heart muscles as well. So they say that the heart is actually the seat of the soul, not the brain. So all of these things, there's some truth behind it, because if you can live brain dead. You can live without your intestines. You can't live without a heart.
Valid point. I didn't think about it like that.
And it's just another way of looking at these, inside of the professional community. They may not call them brains. They may call them something else. It's just a different way of saying there's a degree of consciousness in these areas. You know what I mean? Again, I keep piggybacking, and just so people don't get too lost in the terminology when we say three brains, and you may hear it differently in different schools of thought.
Right.
I like the three brains because I know what a brain does, right? So it helps me understand there is some consciousness in the heart. It wasn't until we did this show last year that I knew there was something linked to the gut. I actually didn't know that, but I had already studied the heart, that there was neurons and all that good stuff in your heart. And that they were saying that the heart actually, when they were able to look at the heart and look at the brain and the activity, there's times where the heart has more activity going on in it. So I had studied that, but I had never known that there was actually something going on down in the gut. But I always know that sometimes I have a gut instinct. You know what I mean? It's just in my gut.
Well, and in some cases, people refer to these same three principles as mind, body, and soul. But if you really look at it, that's what we're talking about: mind. Then your gut, still your body, but your soul, like I said, the heart is seen as the seat of the soul. So you're still looking at the same three principles: mind, body, and soul. But it's always a law of three as well. We have in Masonry and WSB, principal officers, you name it, is always something 3.
Indeed, and just like what Mike was saying when he was speaking about Noah. Noah's like the seed, that resting consciousness in God, right? He gives birth to Ham, the spiritual, Shem, the physical. Hold on, I did it wrong. Shem. Yeah, Shem, the physical, and Japheth is actually the intellectual.
Right.
In man.
Yeah, Shem, the spiritual, Ham, the physical, and Japheth, the emotional,
the
intellectual. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. I knew I got him twisted up. I was like, hold on. Ham is the physical.
Yeah, but I mean, it even goes further. Is I think somebody mentioned over here that when you start talking about Moses, you can even tie the blood in, because technically, yes, when you look at the blood, that's the Red Sea or the Reed Sea. When you start looking at how Moses supposedly parted the Red Sea for Exodus, what that represents is us casting out all the impurities inside our body. Where do you do that? In your kidneys. Your kidneys part and filtrate your blood and your water and pull out all the impurities and put it back into your body. So when Moses, which is actually another term for that you can find as the hippocampus, and the pineal gland sits on top of the hippocampus. The hippocampus is the shape of a ram. They said Moses had horns of light. The hippocampus is shaped like a horned head. And your brainstem sits right on top of it. From there, the hippocampus pushes out all the information down through your body, through the spinal nervous system. So here you take that, and then you start seeing how your body also plays these different characters in the Bible as well, when you want to take it on that spin. Thanks for that call out with that one, talking about the blood. But when you know what the primary force behind creation is found in the sperm, not to be too vulgar or don't want to turn anybody off by using that term, but when you look at how what it takes to create those building blocks of sperm, ova, and all of that, you put that together, it's the primary thing is blood. It's all about the blood. So that exodus in your blood, what you're trying to do is create not just inside of a new vessel, but inside of you, using your own blood, separating that blood, becoming a purified mind, purified consciousness. And that goes through breathing techniques, pranayama, yoga, all of these things. And yes, yoga is in the Bible. Pranayama is in the Bible. All these different things are in the VSLs. You just have to seek them out.
Yeah, I know we had forgot to cut the chat on. I had a brother that's viewing us right now, a brother Akeem Bey. He had texted me and said, according to some experts, the heart is the strongest muscle because it works without stopping, irrespective of the stress or trauma the body endures. The heart muscles work continuously to keep us alive and pumps 2 ounces of blood with every heartbeat.
Yes, we had a little technical difficulty turning on the chat tonight. So if you're viewing, just hit us up on our Facebook page or instant message us on Facebook or any other channel. We'll try to make sure we have chat on for the next live episode. We apologize.
Right, looked like we covered the triple bam. What was the next episode that we had done?
Yeah, we did Temple of Man, and
I think we did Temple Man 1 and 2, right?
Yeah, 1 and 2. We didn't
1 and 2.
we didn't touch on the chakras and the 7 principles, but I think most of what we covered here is that. I think the next one, the third most watched episode, was Lucifer, the Illuminati, and the Age of Reason.
Wow.
Yeah, that was all you, Mike.
I was gonna say before we turn it over to Brother Mike, I did want to add a little something about the Red Sea from what from that particular episode, because Brother Mike had also gone into the aspect of, well, before I get there, Moshe, of course, means the one that was drawn from water, right? So once again, we have another water connection there. But I was going to build on what he said in that particular episode where he was saying that you had to have the spiritual, which is represented by the fire, right? Entering into the water, which is the body or the physical, right? In order for that physical regeneration to take place. I think specifically he had said, he said the children of Israel represented the spiritual aspects of man being inserted into the physical. And the blood is mostly made of water, which is the sea, and contains the passions, fire, which equals red. And my building on that is like, when we look at people and they become flushed and warmed when they're excited or aroused, that's once again the bloodstream, and that's a place that contains much energy. And we could also see the effects of those when they're uncontrolled versus subduing those passions, right? And so in the mythology of the Greeks and Romans, this Red Sea is symbolized by the river Styx, over which souls are ferried by Charon. Charon in this mythology takes the place of Moses, and they continue the connection between souls or spirit entering the physical plane, but requiring a guide in order to enter the body to do our great work. And we also see another situation where soul or fire is plunged into water, the body being the soul receiving the baptism in the physical plane. And we think of John and Jesus as well, how Jesus represented the spiritual fire element in man that had to be plunged into water, which is the body, before it could do its work. So that's it. Mike, you got it, bro. That's all you.
All right, so Lucifer, Illuminati, and the Age of Reason. Wow. So that was one of my favorite, actually all of them my favorite episodes. I ain't gonna lie, I love every episode we do, but that one particularly is one of my favorites because not only is it controversial, but if you understand the truth behind Lucifer, what it actually means, where it actually came from, it was a name that was given to all these different Catholic preachers and bishops and cardinals, and it became a bad name because of an argument between a cardinal named Lucifer and another cardinal. So while they were inscribing the Bible, he put the name Lucifer in there to, basically admonish this man, or not admonish, but punish this man's name and legacy because he didn't like him. So now everybody thinks Lucifer is this, but it's not really that. It's a Latin word for light bringer, light bearer, or in other terms, light phosphorus. And where do you find most of the phosphorus in the creative process? Again, it's in the blood, and you use that in the creative process. The other good thing, well, not other good thing, but the other thing about studying and researching Lucifer for me was that I found so many different comparisons to modern terms for people, modern terms for people that we use in the VSLs, all different VSLs, actually say similar things about their chosen ones to lead their spiritual leaders or spiritual systems as their messiahs, so to speak. Not all of them have messiahs per se, but that figurehead, they all have on those same characteristics as the light bringer. But somehow the term light bringer got misconstrued and it's all messed up. And doing my research, I found it very interesting that, like I said, every religion has that person who is that light bringer, and it's really somebody who's bringing knowledge and understanding to something that is unknown. The Illuminati. What is the Illuminati? It means enlightened one. Same thing, bringing light and knowledge to the unknown. Those same people that were considered messiahs and spiritual leaders of their spiritual systems, they were the illuminated ones. They are the real Illuminati. You see how it transitions from the light bringer to the Illuminati, because you had not just one, but many bringing light, knowledge, and understanding. And then that's how you roll into the age of reason. Age of reason is just using common sense and is thinking, using illuminated thought and understanding on everything you do on a day-to-day basis, which falls right back to the beginning. What are you doing? You're building a temple of man. And you build the temple of man by being illuminated in mind, consciousness, and body.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And that's why it's important in the information age that we do our own research. All of us, well, I say me, I was brought up to think that Lucifer was something evil, something bad. And then I started to learn what the origins of the word was. And then I realized that where I got that from, which was from the Bible, they weren't even talking about some type of demon. They were talking about a king. There was actually a king that they were referencing in there. And then a lot of people get spooked out when they hear light, like in occult schools or in different schools of thought. Light is nothing but knowledge and information. I tend to lecture on that in Masonry because brothers always say light. And I always say, do you know what light is? It's just knowledge or information. When I came into my profession, which is information technology, they gave me light in school. That light is just knowledge, it's information. There's nothing wrong with light. Lucifer or the light bringing or the morning star, some of these things were referenced to different planets in the time. And so you don't know these things unless you get out and you do your research and don't allow someone just to tell you that Lucifer is something bad. Lucifer can be something bad, just depends on the context in which it's being delivered. But as Brother William said a little bit earlier, light bringers were people who brung knowledge or brung enlightenment. Okay, I could even look at Jesus as a light bringer. I can look at Muhammad as a light bringer. And I can look at Buddha as a light bringer. These were people who brought information to raise the conscious awareness of the human thought. That's literally what they were. Now, if you look at it like this, those who strive to keep you from educating yourself or from receiving knowledge are those who choose to keep you in prison or in darkness. Because, and again, in different schools of thought, the absence of knowing is a mental death. It's like you're dead. And then in these different schools of thought, the resurrection or the rising up, right, out of this grave or out of this prison, and sometimes it's depicted as a cave. Coming out of these different states is the Enlightenment stage. It's the point where you are illuminated. And if you decode all of that and you take away all of the fancy wording, it's just coming from a state of being ignorant to a state of knowing. And in the Scottish Rite, in Masonry, they teach that there are 5 enemies of the human condition or the human experience. And the number one enemy of the human experience of the human condition is ignorance, which is the absence of knowing.
Okay.
Nothing spooky about Illuminati or Lucifer. Nothing spooky about that stuff. I'm glad Brother Williams took some time last year and demystified all that for us.
I was about to say, I peeped that plutonium reference too, Professor.
Yeah.
What's up, Mike? What's up?
I got a question from Facebook. How would you all research the etymology? I can't say that word. Etymology of words we are
Etymology?
coming across. Etymology of words that we're coming across, such as Lucifer, like Lucifer. I don't know how everyone else does it, but the way I go about looking at words and researching words is I go all the way back to the historical reference, which most of the time you're going to go, when it comes to English, you're going to go back to Latin and Greek and Germanic roots, because that's what most of the English dialect comes from those three root languages of Germany or Germanic, Latin, and Greek. Then you can even go further back, like with the Hebrew words, they're kind of self-explanatory. If you see, you're like, well, that's not an English word, that's not this word, most likely that's Hebrew, especially when you're talking about the VSLs. So when you look at the VSLs that we use in the United States, rather, the primary one being the Bible, you got to go back to Koine Greek, then you have to go into Hebrew Aramaic, and then some Latin for the New Testament. So I use those as my dictionary, and then go to dictionary, historical names, things like that. If it's a name, I research names and the histories of the names. Anyone else want to talk about how they will go about the etymology?
Yeah, there are dictionaries online that you can use that will be good as a starter. If you're talking about a volume of sacred law, this is one of the things I always ask brothers and sisters when they say that they are learned in the Bible. I ask them, have they ever heard of a strong concordance? And most folks haven't. And I really can't understand how anyone, unless you're Robert House, right, how you could understand what the Bible was really trying to communicate if you don't study the language from which it came. And being that, I don't speak fluent Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek or any of those, Latin or any of those other languages, I have a companion called a strong concordance. So I would recommend that let me give you a good example, like spirit and soul. Spirit and soul over time has gotten spooky. You know what I mean? You put 10 people in a room and you ask them, what is a soul? Where did it come from? Because we all say we're living souls, right? What does that mean? What does it mean by the people who came up with these words? Well, if you got that meaning out of a Bible, then you have to go back and you have to research what soul and spirit meant in the Bible. And the way you do that is pick you up a strong concordance. If you don't want to pick up a physical one, I have a really good one. I've lent a brother. You can go online and they're free online strong concordance. So go and find out what soul and spirit is. You'd be surprised that these words mean wind and breath. Literally, at the end of the day, they meant wind and breath. So go check them out. Nefs and ruach. These are the words. And then when you get into the New Testament, you will find out that it's still like when you say the Holy Ghost or the Holy Spirit. When you go and look at these words, the word there in Greek is pneuma. And this word is the same root word of pneumonia, which is a respiratory infection of the lungs. This is dealing with wind and breath, not something spooky that you might have learned in the 1900s. Again, going back to how Brother Williams demystified the word Illuminati, the group Illuminati, and Lucifer. You got to go back in the time in which these words came from and study what did it mean then. And again, so my advice would be an online etymology dictionary and also a strong concordance if you're reading the Bible, which is one of the many volume sacred laws. Not sure what you would use if you were studying the Quran or other different books, but I'm sure there's some types of tools that are out there to study those words and the origins of those words.
I'm about to say, Brother Watson, I definitely had one up a couple seconds ago too. Let me hit my history, because I was reminded of Surah 96, where we talk about clots of blood in the Quran, and how God had created man from a clot of blood.
And while you're looking that up, I got one more, just as an example of how we need to study the origins of these words. I remember a brother asked me one time, he says, well, he asked me, and this deals with masonry, we say we won't violate the chastity of a master mason's wife, widow, mother, sister, or daughter. And so the question becomes is, he says, brother, what do you consider to be chastity? So I gave it to him, bow, 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 bow. And then he says, have you ever went to research to see that when these words were written, what chastity really meant? Oh, that sent me on a little journey. I was like, no. He said, well, go check it out and come back and see me. So I was about a couple of weeks later, I came back and seen him. What you got there, Brother Williams?
I believe I had that same understanding when you thought, when you think about the word chastity and things like that, when you actually know what chastity means, and men, we don't realize that we have to be chaste in our relationships with our own spouses. So what that means is that you would act as if you were single, even though when you're married. That means controlling your urges and controlling your energy and only using it when you need to and in that time of moment. That's part of being chaste, but it's not just that when it comes to that with relationships, but it's chaste in your actions, your processes of communicating with others. It's basically holding back and not holding back, but being restrictive in your actions towards others and individuals. So you have to have a chaste mind. So, and you have to be aware of somebody else's chastity inside of their mental awareness too. So like, for example, me, I'm not going to attack your awareness or your belief system and say, hey, no, you need to believe like I believe. I'm violating your chastity, what you hold dear, your pureness of thought by trying to impose my thought onto you. It's different where we're relaying information. We're not saying, hey, you need to follow us, you need to believe us. That's not what we're doing. Well, that's what we're doing. We're not saying, hey, don't do this, don't do that. We're saying, hey, this is some information. You read it, you take it with a grain of salt and however you want to take it. But violating chastity is, hey, you need to listen to what I'm saying wholeheartedly and don't listen to nobody else. That's what a lot of other schools are doing.
But charity was another one. We always get brothers, we always get into debate of that. We've been taught today in our day and age what charity means, but very few of us go back to study what did the writers of our rituals mean when they said charity. And again, not trying to digress, I'm just trying to go back to the reason why we took time to demystify Illuminati and Lucifer. We had to go back in the time where these terms first risen or bubbled to the surface, not the terms as we know them today, as they were, I would say they were perverted.
We gotta, go ahead.
There was a question. I wanted to answer the first one and then start to answer the next one here about Masonic concordance. How I typically do it, and being a person that tries to find definitions because they can change the context and meaning of a sentence and a paragraph and a story very significantly. You look at the Bible and what we could call the exegesis, or taking out a content or concept from what you're reading. So typically when you read a scripture, you can't just read it at face value, because you have to read sometimes the before or the after to understand the context of the story and what is really going on. The second thing is you have to look at from the writer's point of view. We know, and we're not going to get into the debate here today on this show, but knowing that sometimes the writer, whether it been one of the apostles or someone viewing from their perspective what was going on, they may have a different take or a different understanding of a situation or a parable or a story. So they wrote it a little different. They may have added their flavor to it. And then when you get into the words, like we're talking about the etymology, having a concordance just simply means a list of words in an alphabetical order to give some meaning in the different languages. So where, we've got like several different languages going on in the Bible. So something that could be singular becomes plural, because we're not talking, when we look at the word Elohim, it's not one person. It is a group of gods. So that takes the whole context of Genesis to a whole different realm that, oh, this just wasn't one person. There was a group of people thinking about this and doing it this way. So now you've changed the story and you spun it on his head because you look at the historical word in its context to what was actually being said. And we have one of our panelists, Dr. Robert House, we call him that a lot of times because he is very adamant about knowing the Hebrew meaning of the word. Because if you don't, it takes the context of what's trying to be taught totally off the rails and you get a totally different understanding and you go away not getting the fullness of what was trying to be said in the scripture. Is there a Masonic concordance? No, not really. There's something out there you get on eBay anywhere that actually goes through the Bible and references some of the terms that's in there. But then you got to look at there's commentaries out there. You know, you got your Matthew Henry, you got your Episcopalian, things like that. You got different denominational commentaries, something similar to what would be the Torah. But again, also taking it back another step, like, okay, not a lot of exposés were 100%. Some of them was written from a different perspective from what they saw. So you get a lot of what we call exposés on the rituals when we study different rituals at different times, like the Bristol ritual or the Frank, or, you know, so you go through all these different rituals and you get different aspects of a particular degree. And there's going to be different characters in one and different characters in another, depending on the time period. So there really isn't, nobody has really that I've seen cataloged all the degrees and gone through everyone and seen the changes when the changes happen. You kind of got to get it from different houses and study the historical context from each house in its separate fashion. For somebody to combine all the houses into one, I just haven't seen it. So another source would be exposés. That's a really good one because then you can kind of see the progression of the ritual and the changes over time. Because anybody that's been in a lot of these houses, you know, when you study ritual, there's always changes happening. We can argue about Pike and all of those changes and things like that, and the Sano degrees, you know, the Egyptian rite, you know, you go on and on and on. You look at all that in the context of what is really trying to be said, that's what really matters. Because I think that's where morals and dogma came in, even though we're not going to try to dispute the originality of the author and the content. But the point of the matter is, it was an interpretation or what we would call a commentary on the Scottish Rite degrees and what he thought was trying to be taught in the parables and the story. So I think, you know, books and resources like that, I would suggest you would go to those and always look at it from a cautious eye. Consider the author, consider the time, consider the politics that was going on around that time. There's a lot of things to the history of what you're reading and why you're reading it that way.
I would like to say one more thing. I would like to say that whoever that brother was that asked that question, that's a good book for him to start writing right there. I'm serious. It just popped up. I was like, man, I would buy a book like that. You know what I mean? Like a stronger coordinates kind of thing for masonry. Man, I'd be all over that. Sorry, brother. Brother Lewis, sorry about that.
Oh, it's all good. I just wanted to add a little conversation that Brother Coney and I had talking about entomology. And like I was looking into something pertaining to Red Sea. And it specifically said that that was the conversation between Yahweh and Moses. And so we were discussing the fact that a lot of times when the Bible was translated and it was the name of a deity, they just said God. Over time, it just was God, and no longer using the name of that particular deity. And once we start to dig into Yahweh, we start making those connections to Prometheus, to Vulcan, to Tubal Cain. But with that said, next topic.
Easy, Tonto. Good stuff. So let's get into the next topic because we're at the 50-minute mark. And, you know, we're getting good. We know how we get when we get amongst each other's. Good brotherly conversation. Masonic geometry. One of our panelists, Stephen Barrett, he presented that. And I was really just floored by a lot of the connections he made. It was just a really good, because you can go so many places with that. I mean, it's just insurmountable to try to exhaust all the aspects of Masonic geometry, as we know, from the symbol to the way we walk in the lodge room, to even the way we subscribe our lives, like 24 gauge and things like that. There's geometry somewhere, somehow, and everything we do and say and we learn. So I thought it was a great episode.
Yeah, and one of the books that he referenced was the Beginner's Guide to How God Constructed the Universe. I believe that's the title of it.
Mm-hmm.
And when you read it, it breaks down the Platonic solids, numerology, astrology. It goes into different aspects of biblical characters in some parts. It also goes into Kabbalism, different ways these number, gematria, just the different ways numbers and geometry play a part of our daily lives, and we don't even realize it. I would suggest to anybody, pick that book up, and it's not going in, you're not going to be sitting up here doing no arithmetic and adding and subtracting or anything. It's just telling you the science behind numbers and the building blocks of life, in which you would notice numbers, but we take for granted because we're on autopilot 95% of the time.
And a lot of us forget, I think that it was Masonic geometry. Masonry and geometry are synonymous. A Mason is a builder. That's literally what a Mason is, a builder. And what we're here to do, we go right back to what we started the show off with. We're building a temple. What is this temple? It's your character. I always define Masonry as a character building academy that has a curriculum with a direct focus on high moral and intellectual excellence. So if you go back to the stonemasons, even back before then, whenever man built something, he had to use geometry. And so building physical edifices, we use geometry. And we also, in masonry, we use masonry to build our spiritual edifices, but they're one and the same. When we say masonry, we're also saying geometry at the same time. As you can see behind Brother Williams's head, or his temple, right? You can see in the center of the square and the compass is the geometry. That's our rule and guide. That geometry, that was the rule and guide of the stonemasons. We know in a Mason's life, his deity is his rule and guide. So sometimes you will hear brothers use that synonymously, that says geometry for the stonemasons and G symbolic for God. But we all know that overseas, they don't have the G there. So we're not going to go down that road right now. But again, you can't speak about masonry and not speak about geometry. And we got the one and only in here right now, Brother Barrett. Go ahead and let loose.
No, I was just literally, when I looked at it and I was asked to do the presentation, the biggest thing that I tried to figure out was I couldn't understand personally why it was such a connection. So that's why I was like, hey, I got to go down this road. And the biggest thing is I think when we look at the terminology, supreme architect of the universe, and you look at geometry, it just fits so nicely. And it's just something that's so universal that we can use. And I think that is very relevant for every Mason just to understand. So again, man, it was a blast to be able to do that one. And I think it's the one thing that transcends all lines, like math, arithmetic, all that transcends regardless of where you're at on the planet. You're still going to work out the same way. And then, I don't know, just like I said, it was very emotional for me to do the research for that particular piece.
And a lot of brothers, we weren't here per se, right? When the great architect of the universe designed everything. And most of us don't have a direct phone. No one can give me the cell phone number where I could call and say, hey, how did you do this? So like in the IT world, let's say in programming, if we wanted to know what a programmer was thinking or someone who engineered something, what we would do was call reverse engineering. Okay, we would work with what we got to try to determine what we don't got. And so literally we use geometry to read nature. Now we know that the great architect of the universe designed everything. And so he left a language, and this language that allows us to read what I would call the first volume of sacred law, the great book of Revelations, which is creation itself. And this language that we use to decipher this creation or this volume of sacred law. Just like in the Bible, you might read Hebrew or you might read Greek. When you look at nature or creation, you read geometry. We couldn't study science. Scientists couldn't study the world around us without geometry. Anything that holds a shape is a geometrical pattern.
Brother Watson, and the thing that they spoke about.
This is, I learned this since I've been studying, and I didn't know. Was one of the key things was that numbers in the original older languages of numbers, how they were written, the value was the amount of angles that was written, how it was written. So you would have a 7 and a line through it to give it 7 angles. Or you had 6 and it was shaped in a certain way. So that number corresponding to the number of angles the shape was given to give it context to its value. So it kind of speaks to how we're created and constructed with the 10 fingers and the 10 toes. Some may say that there's correlation between the Sephiroth and the Kabbalah. There's a reason why. I mean, we could have been created with 4. Why do we have 10? You know, it could be stretched a little bit thin there, but it could be some correlation there. When we talk about math and angles and perpendiculars and things like that, and a dot from a line to a square, and how we operate and move and think. There's an angle, and there's math in everything, and everything that we do creates a shape and creates a context and gives it character. So.
Well, let's think about the early characters that people use for writing. You look at the iron; it's supposed to be a bull, right? An animal of burden, as they would say, right? That's like that first character. You look at the ruah, right? It's the breath going in the body, or the breath coming out of the body. You know, so that's geometry as well.
Yeah, this is good. We got one last topic, and I know we kind of like, to our audience, we kind of sped through because our topics are so heavy. We could talk on it probably one for a whole year. But our last one was done by Dr. Robert House himself. He's a theologian and a Hebrew dialect expert. He did a show on the importance of understanding Hebrew and its relationship to Freemasonry, which, as most of the studious viewers and ourselves know, the rituals are heavy with. There's a lot of it, just as the VSL does too. So we try to draw those connections, and he did a great job explaining how the letters make up the words and how to read Hebrew correctly, how to understand the context of the words and how it's being read. You, as we said earlier in the show, this goes back to the etymology. You gotta understand the Hebrew. You can't get the context what the ritual's trying to say if you don't get it. It's just that simple.
Yeah, and along with that, just go out, get on YouTube and Google, download you something with the Hebrew alphabet on it with the name, and post it on the wall somewhere. And when you got time, Google them, Google each letter, and just follow that rabbit hole each letter will take you on. Because when you take one letter and then you combine them all, you get a different story. Just like when you look at Jehovah written in Hebrew, we were taught it means one way. Well, we grew up learning it one way, but as you decipher the meaning of Jehovah, then you break down the Hebrew alphabet where the letters come from, you get a complete different understanding from what you've learned as a kid to what you learn after you break it down and you do your own research, and you actually get a better understanding for it and a better love and appreciation of words once you do that. And the Hebrew alphabet, not only can you do that with breaking down the letters, and to get an understanding of that, you get a numerical value from it, as brother Dr. House mentioned as well. That numerical value in gematria will take you onto a whole nother trip where certain combinations where brother Chris Lewis L mentioned that that these combinations of words and letters like Moshe means one thing. You take those numbers and 40 in Mem, and then you take Shin. I forgot the numerical value of that. It means something, and that number actually means to draw out. And the same thing goes along with other words like atom. You take those letters and those numerical values will tell you what it means on a different level. Sometimes it's more spiritual, or sometimes it's delivering a message, and that message is only for those who have ears to hear and the eyes to see.
That was a beautiful show. One of the things I was happy that Brother House had deciphered for us is he did go into the origins of Hebrew, where it came from, what cultures used it. And he also said it's not the oldest language, right? And so that was very important as well. But when it comes to Masonry, we have a lot of Hebrew names and words that we use, and it just behooves a brother that if he's in Masonry and he's a real student of Masonry, you got to kind of understand Hebrew a little bit. The story, the whole Blue House story, I'm sorry, the whole Blue House story takes place basically in the Old Testament, which is primarily a Hebrew text.
And you know, it's crazy, Brother Coney, not to jump on you real quick, but if we think about things like the different levels within the Hebrew language, I thank, you know, Brother House and Brother Williams for like pushing us towards that, to understanding these letters. Because we think about the letter Bait, right? Or Bait in Islam, Bet in the Aleph Bet, you have it built a certain way. It's a house. It has to have the dot on the inside for us to tell the difference. And you know what I started thinking? Because they said it has a feminine character to it. I started thinking that reminds me of the womb, right? If you have an ovum inside there, that is the dot inside the bait. But that's all. That's a little something.
That's good. That's good. We had a question in the chat. Why aren't we instructed on the significance of language in our lodges?
I just think it's something that probably was lost over time. You know, it's and I think that's unique to the different lodges, meaning there may be lodges that actually teach that, but in the brother that's asking the question, they may not teach it in their lodge. We don't, you know, in my lodge, it wasn't anything they were taught. I think lodges are just a sum of a group of men that come together. And normally you talk about in Masonry, what those men like to talk about based upon their conscious awareness, where they're at in their journeys and their travels. So we're just so happy, if you think about it, all of us on here, we're in different lodges around the nation. Some of y'all, matter of fact, I don't think I've met anyone face to face before on the panel. So, but again, that's a good question. And I would say to the person that asked that question, maybe, you know, study up a little bit and offer a lecture in your lodge, because it is important.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. You know, it's just where, you know, it's something that was lost in antiquity. Many things that were tradition back in the day, we don't do now. And some would say, hey, we need to go back to that old school tradition and go back to doing some of those things that we used to do. What I would suggest is, like Past Master Washington suggested, you know, research it, bring it up, do a lecture on it, and try to re-energize these things. That's what we need to do is as Masons. Just because you're not the worship master or a past master doesn't mean you can't raise your hand and say, hey, can I offer something good for the craft and good for the order? And, you know, only thing they can do is tell you no. But if you don't ask the question, how do you know that you can't present a lecture in your lodge if you bring up the subject matter?
Yep, that's a very good point there, Past Master Williams. That, and I even told, you know, our recently raised brethren, so you may come across something in the ritual or in your studies or your reading and stuff like that, And if you want to give a lecture on it, let me know. We schedule. I believe in that.
So I would come from this angle too, because I think a lot of times this question gets, I guess, brought into a different angle. Not so much why wasn't it done or was it a lost art, but I think a lot of times there's a perspective that in our lodges, a lot of brothers come to be fed or to learn because of the different backgrounds that they come from. Either doesn't afford them the time, nor do they have a lot of interest. They just may come for different reasons. Everybody comes for the camaraderie or just to be a part of something that's holistic or to give back to the community. But when you look at it from an educational standpoint, you're going to find brothers as well that want to understand, why do we do the things that we do? Why do we do it in the lodge this way? Like, who said it had to be done? Why do we wear aprons? Why do we wear black and white with gloves? You know what I'm saying? What are the collars? What are they really significant of? Did people wear collars before? Is it something that we just started? So when you trace a lot of it back, as we were taught by, again, going back to that Jewish mysticism or the Hebrew culture or that spiritual aspect of Masonry or Freemasonry, excuse me, you look at a lot of stuff that we do, we look like rabbis. At the end of the day, we're supposed to act and think like one. We're magi's. We study, we execute, we learn, we enlighten. He who sits in the east with the hat, he's supposed to emulate that. That's who he is. He's wisdom between beauty and strength. So how can one be wise if he doesn't know the aspects of all angles of education? Not just knowing what a scripture means and where it is, but knowing the math and the science and the geometry, taking the trivium and the quadrivium and taking it to a different level, which we're supposed to walk the steps to the middle chamber of understanding. But most of us don't go that far because it's just either scary or it's too illuminating or it's almost blinding, because it challenges what we already believe. It challenges what we think we already know. And it can be scary. So, I would say, like everybody else has said already, take it upon yourself to go out and research that and bring a little bit of illumination to someone, and they may change their whole aspect and ask for more. And it was like, well, where'd you get that from? And I didn't know that. And you should be in charge of education there, because you brought something to the light that just somebody else just didn't take the 5-10 minutes or maybe an hour to find out.
Brother Chris touched on something earlier that I wanted to make sure we got into the show, is dealing with Hebrew and Freemasonry. Is very important, even religion to that degree, that in the Semitic languages, Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, there is no letter J. So we have a lot of names for characters, and we have initials for characters and so forth that could have never been in those languages, because those languages just didn't have those letters.
Right. And there's somebody talking about the Ruach. We just mentioned about the breath, the pneuma. Right. God is a verb that can be felt, seen, and heard. It is an ever-moving energy. Just like wind and air, it can move things. You can feel it, you breathe it, you exhale it. It's a constant force that is everywhere and in nature. Nothing can exist without some level of breath going through it. Everything has to have some type of breath. It's just that. It's just the way it is. Even the trees exhale and inhale in one way or form or another through a chemical reaction called photosynthesis. That's still an exchange of CO2 for O2. Okay, it's just an opposite direction. Our bodies do the same thing. The water does the same thing. People don't know that. You ever wonder why there's whales? Well, why does a whale need to exist? It's just a nice animal, right? Comes in different sizes. No, they actually process plankton and go through a process by which filtering the water, releasing oxygen into the air. They are there for a reason. They scrub the water and scrub the air. They're natural air scrubbers. But people don't realize that everything is in an ecosystem of giving and taking. That is what it is. It's life, death, and rebirth, constantly happening all the time, every millisecond. Everything. So, when we understand and when we talk about letters, We say, well, if J didn't exist and Jesus' name really wasn't Jesus, it was Isis, but what did that really mean? Well, that was a title. That really wasn't a person if you want to be technical. I mean, so if he was a person and he really wasn't God sent on earth in the flesh, then you would ask other questions. I mean, but we're not gonna get into that. So that's where the rabbit hole comes into play. You learn different things because you learn what a word really means and a letter really existed or not. That's all we're saying.
Yeah. And if you breathing, you believing.
Just one note. I don't know who watches The Witcher on Netflix, but when they had the Magi's, right, and they were being taught, right, she gave them something that was living in one hand and told them to do something with the other hand. And she told them that, one girl who did not grab the thing that was living, her left hand actually shriveled up because she took the life from her hand to try to do whatever she was doing. And she taught them that basically it's a transfer of energy. We can't do what we do just out of thin air. That's all you're doing.
Great analogy. Great. I had to check the show out. All right.
Definitely
All right. Again, want to thank everyone for tuning in to our very first live broadcast of Esoteric Lighthouse. And we will continue doing this for our future episodes. Next month's treat for you, we got a double header from you coming from Brother Chris Lewis L. and Brother Javon Greenway, going over some African spirituality for Black History Month. All right.